Sometimes you really have to read between the lines to follow the Apostle Paul. So much in his letters goes unsaid simply because there's a context behind his letters that his original readers would have instantly understood. For us, it's like listening to someone carry on a telephone conversation when we can't hear what the other party is saying. Even more than that, it's like walking in mid-conversation so that we don't even have the benefit of hearing the whole conversation from the beginning. In today's reading from 2 Corinthians, Paul draws an important distinction between the Old Covenant with Moses and the New Covenant in Jesus Christ. In order to really understand what Paul is saying, we have to do a little bit of reconstruction. We have to read between the lines a little bit to make it make full sense. That's what we'll do today. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Thursday, June 1st, 2023. We know at least two things about Paul and the Corinthian church. We know that despite the fact that he had founded that church, relations between himself and the congregation were strained. And we know, especially from reading 1 Corinthians, that the church itself experienced its own internal conflicts. At this point, we have to do a little reconstruction about the Corinthian conflict to make today's reading make sense. Keep in mind that the early church was often composed of both Jewish and Gentile converts to Christianity, and that was true in Corinth. Jewish converts could not help but understand Christianity except through their Jewish background, and part of that background was the law. We read about this conflict in Acts as well as in various of Paul's letters. The conflict for Paul boiled down to this: what is the basis of our righteousness before God? For Jews and for Jewish converts to Christianity, it was adherence to the law given through Moses. That's what they knew. Paul insisted that this was a losing proposition, though. Righteousness before God, following the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, was only through his righteousness, which is imputed to us. That means we are counted as righteousness because of his righteousness. It is fair to assume that this conflict forms the background of this letter, 2 Corinthians. It is very likely that some other preachers who came through Corinth preached a gospel which included the importance of following the law as part of Christian faith. It is against this background that Paul writes, "Our competence is from God, who has made us competent to be ministers of a new covenant, not of letter, but of spirit. For the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. Now if the ministry of death, chiseled in letters of stone tablets," by which Paul means both the Ten Commandments and the law as a whole, "came in glory so that the people of Israel could not gaze at Moses' face because of the glory of his face, a glory now set aside, how much more will the ministry of the Spirit come in glory? For if there was glory in the ministry of condemnation, much more does the ministry of justification abound in glory. Indeed, what once had glory has lost its glory because of the greater glory. For if what was set aside came through glory, much more has the permanent come in glory." It's a little tough to follow, and it would be very easy to see this as a rejection of the law on Paul's part, but that's not his point. His point is that the glory of the law, and it was filled with glory, is now overshadowed by the still greater glory of the righteousness we have in Jesus Christ. It's not so much a rejection of the law as it is a reframing of the law, placing it within the context of Jesus Christ. Instead of the law being the basis of our righteousness, it is now part of how we understand how we should live in right relation to God and to one another. What it no longer does for us is provide us the path to righteousness. Remember, when Paul was writing and founding churches, there was no New Testament, no Gospels, no epistles, no Acts. The Bible of the early church was what we call the Old Testament, and Paul was certainly not rejecting the Bible as they knew it. Instead, he was reinterpreting it through the new covenant established with both Jews and Gentiles, with all humanity through Jesus Christ. So where does that leave the law? Instead of the law being our path to God, it becomes a guide to living in grateful response to what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. Paul writes much more extensively about this in his letter to the Romans. There he says that the law serves as a kind of mirror to show us how far we are from true righteousness, and it serves as a kind of teacher to show us the way. But on its own, it cannot make us righteous. Even if we could fulfill the letter of the law, we would still be lacking, for we would either be caught up in false pride, look at me, look how well I keep the law, or worse, we would think that we are saved by our own hard work. To the extent that the conflicts in Corinth were over the law and its place in the life of faith, Paul has now laid down an important marker, that he, as a good and faithful Jew, no longer understood his own righteousness to come through rigid adherence to the law, no matter how good the law may be. Instead, he is saying that his righteousness, and ours, is only through the righteousness of Christ. Everything we do is simply to express our gratitude to God's mercy. Tomorrow, Paul utters one of his signature lines, clay jars. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.